Welcome to the Strong AF podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Barnes. I'm a strength and rehab coach for climbers, and I blend my 24 years of expertise and experience as an elite level climber, competitive powerlifter, and rehab professional to bring you a podcast that will help you become stronger and more resilient. In this podcast, we'll talk about all things strength training for climbers. We'll also talk about climbing injuries, rehab, and why training and rehab go hand in hand. To connect, be sure to follow me over on Instagram at Natasha Barnes. To find out more about coaching or getting help with an injury, check out my website at natashabarnesrehab.com. And now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Strong AF podcast. This is episode number 2. And in this episode, we are going to talk about why climbers strength train, or why they should strength train, why you can't just climb to get strong, strength standards for climbers, and how much strength training climbers should do. Let's dive in. We're going to start off with 3 reasons climbers should strength train. And before we launch into that, I want to say, what do I mean by strength training? Because sometimes I get this question, like, what do you mean by strength training? Are you talking about hangboarding? What are you talking about? So when I'm talking about strength training in this episode, I'm talking about resistance training. That means weight training. That means basically things that are done in a weight room. So things with barbells, things with dumbbells, things with machines, things with kettlebells, things with bands, even some body weight training in this case. We can definitely categorize finger training, hangboarding, things like that as strength training for climbing. That is also climbing supportive training, but that's not necessarily what I'm talking about in this episode. So I want to make sure that people understand that. All right, let's get to 3 reasons climbers should strength train. So reason number 1, health and injury risk reduction. We'll get into more detail on exactly how much we should be doing later on in this podcast, but currently the CDC physical activity guidelines for Americans recommends at least twice weekly resistance training for all adults. According to the best current research, and this is a meta-analysis and systematic review, I'll link in the show notes, strength training can reduce your risk of overuse injury by 66%. That's huge. If I could hand you a pill that would reduce your risk of an overuse injury by 66%, would you take that pill? I sure would. Strength training is really great for reducing risk of injury. We know this from a lot of research. And just to clarify for people listening, if you don't know already, a meta-analysis is a statistical analysis that combines the results of multiple scientific studies, and a systematic review is a synthesis of the evidence on a topic. So basically, these are the bottom line about what works and what doesn't when it comes to a topic. Other research, another systematic review and meta-analysis suggests that when compared to no exercise, resistance training is associated with about a 21% reduction in all-cause mortality risk. That is also huge. Resistance training can reduce your risk of dying from all kinds of things. So we definitely want to be strength training, not only as climbers, but just as human beings to keep our bodies healthy. According to research, only a small number of the population actually engages in resistance training and meets the guidelines. So the data that we have in the United States shows that about 53.3% met guidelines for aerobic physical activity, so cardio, but only 23.2% met both the aerobic and resistance training guidelines. So not very many people are even meeting these guidelines to begin with. According to the American College of Sports Medicine, their guideline for strength, the research that they have shows that resistance exercise can help manage and treat many conditions, including arthritis, cancers, cardiovascular disease, dementia, depression, diabetes, fall risk, frailty, which, by the way, we're going to have an episode on strength training for older adults because I think that's really important, It can also help with hypertension, insomnia, low back pain, mental health, movement disorders, obesity, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, pulmonary disorders, peripheral vascular disease, and stroke. That is huge. Like, there's really not a very good reason to not be strength training with the research that we have on how good strength training is for your health. And if you want to know who shouldn't strength train, well, you're going to be hard pressed to find any research on a single group of people who can't strength train. Strength training is beneficial, like, even if you're elderly, even if you're pregnant. It's also beneficial for children and adolescents. It's even beneficial for paraplegics and other disabled people. So pretty much everybody should be strength training. And I already know what you're thinking. Does climbing count? Does climbing count as part of these guidelines? I've talked to other experts in the field, and the consensus seems to be that climbing probably counts for a small part of the guidelines, but it's not clear how much, partially because it's not measurable. Also, you run into the issue of how to overload climbing movements, which is the same issue you run into with bodyweight exercise if we're trying to consider bodyweight exercise as part of these guidelines as well. According to a study titled Effects of Low versus High Load Resistance Training on Muscle Strength and Hypertrophy in Well-Trained Men, bodyweight training exercises can build muscle, but they require a large number of sets, reps, and pushing yourself to absolute failure. You'd have to do a ton of hard climbing. And not only are energy and time a limiting factor, but skin is a big limiting factor. Not to mention the toll on smaller structures of your body if we're just using climbing to meet these guidelines on your fingers. Like, how much climbing can your fingers actually tolerate? Probably less than you actually need to meet these guidelines. So just to recap why we shouldn't just climb to get strong, climbing alone is just an ineffective way to build strength and get objectively stronger. Strength is something that you really need to train separately from climbing because it can't be significantly improved or effectively improved by climbing alone. Climbing is so variable, it's unmeasurable. The stresses are never predictable, which is also why it's harder to build absolute strength with climbing alone. Not to mention, it's not sufficient for lower body strength development. So strength is defined as your ability to produce force. The most logical and effective way to develop strength is to train using movements that allow you to produce the most force by involving the most muscle mass over the longest effective range of motion. I think I'm going to record a separate episode about picking effective strength exercises because you guys know I have some hot takes about this. If you've been following me over on Instagram, you'll know what I'm talking about. By the way, if you want to check out some of my hot takes, I have a lot of them saved in my highlights on Instagram under rants. And those are really popular, which is why I saved them there. So definitely go check them out. Okay, and this brings us to reason number 2, climbers should be strength training. And that is to build strength, to build tissue capacity, and to support climbing practice. We're not strength training because it's going to directly improve climbing performance. I want people to get over that idea. Maybe it will for some people, but that's not the reason why we're strength training. We're not strength training to directly improve your climbing. So there's a few things that we're trying to accomplish when it comes to building strength and tissue capacity with strength training for climbers. So one of them is obviously to develop strong hips and legs. Unless you campus every single thing you climb, you actually do use significant leg strength when you climb. I want you to think about heel hooks. I want you to think about drop knees. I want you to think about knee bars. Plus, I want you to think about being able to produce large amounts of force quickly in your lower body to execute explosive dead points, explosive dynos, explosive lunge movements. The stronger you are, the more explosive you can be. Not to mention, it helps to have strong legs, knees, ankles for taking big bouldering falls, right? You need hip, leg, knee, and ankle strength to fall and land safely. So if you're a boulderer who's falling, you need that leg strength. If you're a sport climber or a trad climber, you still might need that leg strength. If you're taking a big fall where you're whipping into the wall, it still helps to have strong legs, strong knees, strong ankles to support that. If you don't think that you need strong legs for climbing, that you don't need or that you don't use leg strength for climbing, then I would suggest taking a closer look at how you currently utilize your hips and your legs and your feet when you're climbing, because you're probably not using them enough. And I want to caveat that training legs does not have to mean gaining a bunch of leg size. In fact, most strength gains at first are actually neurological. So most of the time when people start strength training, they're getting strong not because they're building bigger muscles necessarily. A lot of times it's because they're becoming more neurologically efficient, meaning they're teaching their body to recruit more muscle fibers at once, and that's where a lot of the initial strength gains come from. It's also a lot harder than you think to gain size, especially without increasing your caloric intake. So you don't have to worry about that, and we're definitely going to have probably a podcast series all about that, but just so that you know right off of the bat, you will not build leg size unless you are also in a caloric surplus with your diet. It's literally impossible for your body to put mass on, and unless you give it those building blocks, unless you're eating more food. So I want people to stop worrying about that, because it's not going to happen unless you're doing it very intentionally. And that's coming from somebody who has intentionally put on about 50 pounds. The other thing that we want to do is obviously we want to build a strong upper body. So upper extremity injuries are probably the most common injuries in climbing, and obviously climbing requires a lot of upper body strength. So by working on that and supporting our upper body, we're going to reduce our risk of these types of injuries, while we're also increasing our performance on the rock or our performance potential because we have a stronger upper body. So probably the most common injuries that I see when I do injury consultations with climbers is shoulder injuries, elbow injuries, wrist injuries. I sometimes will also see like neck and upper back injuries. So obviously training those areas is going to be really important. And obviously those aren't all the injuries that I see in climbers. I see injuries all over the body in climbers, but upper body injuries, including finger injuries, actually are predominantly what's more common. But obviously we see like low back injuries, hip injuries, knee injuries, groin injuries, calf injuries, ankle injuries, foot injuries. We can get injured all over the place as climbers, unfortunately. But the stronger we are, the more injury resistant we're going to become, as we talked about earlier in this episode. The other thing that strength training is helpful for is training us to have a stronger core. And I want to talk about compound lifting, including like barbell lifting specifically, because a lot of my clients notice that they've gotten a ton stronger in their core just by doing heavy squats and actually heavy deadlifts as well, because those exercises also train your core pretty significantly. And in fact, we have some research that shows that a 6-rep max intensity back squat has the potential to improve your core strength as effectively, if not actually more effectively, than planks and weighted planks, which are some exercises that climbers like to do in order to train their core. And when I say if not better, I mean, when we think of our core, we often think of like our abs, so like our six-pack muscle and our obliques. That's only part of our core. Our core also includes our back muscles, and squats and deadlifts also train our back muscles much more significantly than other types of core exercises like planks and weighted planks and other sort of like gymnastic exercises that climbers do that target a little bit more of like the front of your core. And that's really important because if you don't realize this already, we are using a ton of our posterior chain, including our back and the back of our core when we're climbing in order to stay on steep walls. It's really, really important. So we want to pick exercises, like I said, that are going to be most effective, most bang for our buck in training, getting us stronger. And most of my clients don't even have to do any direct core work, and they will see a significant increase in their core tension, their core strength on the climbing wall. I've had so many climbers tell me that when they started squats, particularly when they start squatting heavy, which I know sounds strange, but that exercise in particular, I've had clients tell me like, wow, I feel so much more body tension on the wall. I feel like I can really pull my hips into the wall. I feel like I can really drive with my hips, or rock over or pull my hips closer into the wall a lot more powerfully now that I am squatting heavy. And that's something that I've definitely noticed myself in climbing once I started incorporating strength training. So fun fact for people who hate training core, I am one of them. You might not need to if you are lifting heavy. And if you like training core, that's totally fine. Some of my clients love training core. I definitely prescribe people like direct core work, especially if they need it or especially if they just like to do it as part of their strength training, but you might not need to if you're lifting heavy. Okay, reason number 3 why climbers should be strength training is, and we've already talked about this a little bit, training efficiency. So strength training in the gym, like we mentioned before, is probably one of the most efficient and effective ways to get objectively stronger to support your climbing. Climbing alone, like I said, is not as efficient for building strength. I also want to point out in this section that the point of strength training or like the point of picking certain exercises for strength training for climbers isn't necessarily to pick exercises that look like climbing or that we think are directly transferable to climbing. The point of being in the weight room is that it is a really effective and efficient place to overload muscle, to overload tendons, to overload ligaments, and make them stronger and more resilient for climbing. Again, going back to building that tissue capacity. It's not just about pure strength. It's also about tissue tolerance and tissue capacity, which is part of what makes us more injury resistant. So we want to train that up so that climbing isn't getting us as injured and so that we can also climb more. Once we build a bunch of strength in the weight room, then we can take all of that strength and all of that resilience that we built in the weight room and we can go and then apply it on the wall during climbing practice. One thing I really want people to understand is that strength training is basically GPP for climbers. So GPP just stands for General Physical Preparation, and all gym training is GPP. Okay, the sport-specific training is literally done practicing your sport. That's not what we're trying to do in the weight room. We're not mimicking climbing. We're not trying to practice climbing in the weight room. That's done on the climbing wall. The point of GPP is to help you get stronger in a more well-rounded way and to help build up some work capacity and to get yourself better able to tolerate loads so that you can train harder when you're climbing and so that you can train more when you're climbing. Who doesn't want to train more? More training you can do, the better you can get at climbing. So of course we want that. GPP programs are going to look very similar from sport to sport. All athletes need to develop total body strength. For climbers, we might program a little bit more upper body movements than we might for like a track athlete or for like a cycling athlete, but the programs are going to look pretty similar. Again, I want to reiterate that we're not doing this as a guarantee that you will climb harder. So nobody has ever said, nobody should be saying, and I definitely haven't said, that deadlifting will guarantee that you climb harder. It might. Getting stronger might help you climb harder if you're a very specific person, which we're actually going to do an episode on this. But I don't want people to think of it that way. I want you to think about strength training as just generally making you stronger, making you more athletic, and making you better prepared for the high intensity movements you're going to experience in climbing, instead of this deadlift, this double body weight deadlift is directly going to help me climb my V10 roof project. It might if strength training is like a rate limiter in your climbing, or if strength is a rate limiter in your climbing, which for me it definitely was, and we'll go into that in another episode. But for most people, like I said, I don't want you to really think about it that way. All right, and that brings us to the next part of the podcast, which is how much strength training climbers should be doing. How much should we be doing? I think at a minimum, we should be looking at what the general physical activity guidelines, what the general recommendations are for strength training for adults for health, at least, right? So just to remind you, the CDC physical activity guidelines for Americans recommends at least twice weekly resistance training for all adults. They say adults should do muscle strengthening activities of moderate or greater intensity and that involve all major muscle groups on 2 or more days a week, as these activities provide additional health benefits. Slightly different recommendations for children and adolescents, slightly different recommendations for older adults, slightly different recommendations for pregnant people and folks with chronic conditions and disabled people, but the recommendations are pretty similar, and the recommendations are that all of these populations should be strength training. So I think we should at least be meeting those minimum requirements for health over and above even just training to help our climbing. So that's going to look like 2 days a week. Unfortunately, they don't give us any specific like prescription for that. But if we look at the American College of Sports Medicine, they recommend a minimum of 2 days a week with 8 to 12 repetitions of 8 to 10 different exercises that target all major muscle groups. Keep in mind, this is for health, and it's not necessarily for optimal strength or for sports, okay? This is just for health, and I think the prescription is probably going to look different if we're trying to optimize for strength and not just for health. But for the health recommendation, that's what the American College of Sports Medicine recommends. Okay, but what if we're an athlete, or what if we do want to optimize a little bit more for strength? What are minimum effective training doses for strength? There's some research that points us to what could be a minimum effective dose for strength. So according to a 2020 study titled "The Minimum Effective Dose Required to Increase 1 Rep Max Strength in Resistance-Trained Men, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis," the minimum volume for squat and bench press, and I think that they are doing squat and bench press as basically like a proxy for upper body and lower body strength. Also, don't get sidetracked worried about this was done in resistance trained men, because women respond very similarly to exercise. Would we like to see more research done on women? Yes, and that is definitely happening. But we have no reason to believe that women would respond any differently to this, so just keep that in mind. So the recommendation of the minimum volume for increasing strength, or increasing the 1 rep max strength, which is a good proxy for total strength, for the squat and bench press is going to be 1 set to failure with about 70 to 85% of your 1 rep max 2 to 3 times per week. But that does come with caveats. So I want you to keep in mind that this was done for intermediate lifters, but it would obviously work pretty similarly for beginners as well. But I want you to keep in mind the caveat with this is that it's not the optimal dosage, it's just the minimum required dosage. Another meta-analysis by Ralston and Schoenfeld et al. Showed that this is not enough volume to maximize hypertrophy or strength gains. So it's a minimum, but it's not optimal for maximizing. So keep that in mind. Is there an upper limit for like how much strength training you should be doing? Yeah, according to research, it does seem like there is an upper limit. And the upper limit of how much training is going to be effective in a single session is going to be probably around 8 to 10 total sets per muscle group. And after that, there seems to me to be diminishing returns. So keep that in mind. Nobody should be doing that many sets in their strength training. And this doesn't count warm-up sets, obviously. This counts working sets. But if you're doing 8 to 10 working sets, that's going to be too much volume for you. So, all right. And that brings us to the section of the podcast where we're going to talk about strength standards for climbing. How heavy should you be able to lift? Are there strength standards? Let's talk about it. So I'm going to tell you right off of the bat, strength standards are arbitrary. There is no current published peer-reviewed data on this for climbers. And most strength standards that you can find out there aren't actually based on any data. They're literally just based on somebody's opinion about how much athletes should be able to lift. So I want you to stop worrying about strength standards. So here are some benchmarks that I've heard from people online for some of the major lifts. So for a squat, it is said that you should be able to back squat 1.5 to 2 times your body weight. For a bench press, you should be able to bench press 1 to 1.5 times your body weight. Some standards say for 1 rep, some standards say for multiple reps. For deadlifts, you should be able to deadlift 2 to 2.5 times your body weight. These are arbitrary, you guys. You do not need to hit these numbers in order to climb well. It's not about the numbers. I know we love numbers because it gives us something to aim for, but for some athletes, this is literally going to fall short of their training needs. And for other athletes, it's going to be unrealistically attainable. So I've literally trained people who deadlifted 2 times body weight in their first ever session with me learning how to deadlift because they just have that baseline strength, whether it's genetic or whether they have a training history in their background. They were able to do a 2 times body weight deadlift. I've had other climbers who will never deadlift 2 times body weight unless they start training like a power lifter and unless they do that consistently for many years. The good news is you don't have to deadlift 2 times body weight in order to be a good climber. So I want you to let go of these arbitrary standards. I have definitely worked with climbers who can deadlift 2 times, 3 times their body weight, and they're not climbing that hard. I've also worked with, I had a V13 climber that I worked with who could barely overhead press an empty barbell, which weighs 45 pounds, for 6 reps. That was a struggle for him. He did have a shoulder injury that we were working on, but that is definitely, we want to see that climber's strength go up for sure, but is it stopping him from climbing V13? Apparently not. He doesn't need to be able to do that necessarily or that particular movement in order to climb V13, but he probably should work on that because that's going to help with his shoulder health. Take these benchmarks with a grain of salt, or don't even take them into regard at all because I don't think they're super important. Power Company Climbing has an assessment that they do. It's not published or peer reviewed. It is a data set of over 600 assessments from climbers. But there's not a clear relationship in these numbers, and the correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. So if we looked at a scatter plot of these, the numbers are going to be all over the place. There's probably like a weak correlation to being able to do a weighted pull-up to how hard you climb because, you know, the harder you climb, the stronger you need to be to do those difficult moves. But again, correlation does not equal causation. Those people are not climbing that hard because they can do X on a weighted pull-up. They can do X on a weighted pull-up and they're climbing that hard. It just, I want people to be really careful when they're looking at things like this. I'm going to link to the Power Company Climbing assessment so you guys can check it out because there's a whole article with it and everything on their website. So I'll put that in the show notes. The strength measurements that they gather, they did a hangboard strength measurement. So it's like a 10-second hang on a 20 mil. They also do a 1 rep max weighted pull-up. They do max pull-ups and push-ups, but that's a little bit more like endurance. Although, you know, strength is going to be somewhat corollary there. They do a 1-arm overhead press, which is a 1 rep max. and they do a deadlift, which is a 1 rep max. I've done their assessment. I probably am like a weird outlier on their assessment because I think I deadlifted like 360 or something like that when I did this assessment, and I was climbing like I think like V8 or V9 on the tension board at that time. So probably some weird outlier just because I am also a power lifter, and so my strength numbers are going to be off the charts. I want you to take that with a grain of salt. Obviously we can maybe look at those and see if you have like significantly low numbers, or if you're an outlier somewhere. Maybe that will indicate where our training needs to be focused somewhat. Like if you are weirdly low in one of these measurements, maybe we do need to work on it. But I don't even worry about that because I'm going to have my climbers strength training anyway, no matter where their strength is. Here's what I think. I think we should be getting as strong as possible until the following happens. 1, you can no longer build strength unless you start strength training like a strength athlete or a power lifter. If we have to change your training so much that it's starting to look more like a powerlifting program, that's a problem because that is not the goal. If you're spending so much time in the weight room that it's inhibiting your climbing practice or your ability to recover, then we're doing too much, okay? It's okay if strength training cuts into some of your climbing practice. Like there's going to be a little give and take there. And honestly, I think that a lot of people are climbing for too long in their sessions or doing too much climbing in their sessions and getting in too much junk mileage. So we could probably make a lot of people's climbing sessions shorter, and that would be okay. And we could do a little bit more strength training. But if it's cutting so much into your climbing practice that you're not getting enough climbing practice, obviously that's going to be a problem. And if you're doing so much strength training that you're not able to recover, you're not able to perform in your climbing sessions, that's going to be a problem too. And I don't mean perform like you need to go into a climbing session and be 100% recovered, 100% fresh, and be climbing at 100% your max grade. I mean recovered enough to go in and have a quality session. We're going to talk about auto-regulation because that is a huge important component to strength training. We're going to have a whole separate episode about that, but you should be auto-regulating your strength session and you should be auto-regulating your climbing sessions as well, and that's going to help you be more productive in your training. Either way, I just want to say that we should be getting as strong as possible, and for some climbers, they might hit a 3 times body weight deadlift. For other climbers, that might end up with just a body weight deadlift. It doesn't really matter. We're just trying to get people as strong as we can within what they can reasonably do. I love the saying, strength is never a weakness, but strength does become a weakness if it makes you lose sight of your actual goal. And if we start chasing arbitrary strength standards, we're losing sight of the goal. So remember, strength training is GPP. It's climbing supportive training. It's just one piece of the pie when it comes to climbing training. It's important to be strong enough for climbing, and it's important to work on building tissue capacity and work capacity, but nothing actually beats practicing your sport. So I want to drill that into everybody's head. I think a lot of people see what I do on Instagram, and I talk about strength training all the time because I'm very passionate about it. I'm also a power lifter, but I am in no way saying that strength training should replace climbing training or that strength training is like a guarantee to improve your performance in climbing. I think strength training does improve a lot of people's performance and it does help reduce your risk of getting injured, but it's not the only thing that's important when it comes to training. I just happen to talk about a very small piece of the pie when it comes to the total picture of training. And I'm going to do an episode about this. I also want people to realize that you shouldn't be training like a power lifter. The training that you see me doing on Instagram, I often share my personal training on Instagram. And depending on what I'm doing in my own training, sometimes it's a climbing focus, sometimes it's a powerlifting focus. I'm always doing strength training, but the strength training that you see me doing is usually for powerlifting. It's because I literally compete in a strength sport called powerlifting, and that's what my climbing is focused on. My training, not my climbing. My training is focused on helping me improve my 1 rep max for powerlifting competitions, and it's not the way that you should train. It's not the way that I have my athletes train. It's just me showing you what my training looks like. If you want help with a program, I can't recommend my foundational strength training program more. I might be a little biased, but we had over 250 people do the original program, and now we have about 150 people doing the current version, which, by the way, is different from the original version. The programming is completely different, and it's now available on an app. It's a 10-week program that changes throughout the course of the program to expose you to different exercise variations, different rep and set schemes. It also helps you learn how to better auto-regulate your training. Week 5, we do an RPE audit, which is really helpful for people for getting better at auto-regulating and getting better at selecting the right weight for their training session. I like the idea of exposing people to different reps, different types of numbers of sets, different exercises. I want you to get some different and varied strength training experience in this program so that you have a little more information to go off of when you're auto-regulating, and there's some things that you can learn from that. It also keeps the training less stale. So there's a reason it's designed the way that it's designed. But when you get this program, it includes immediate access to the 10-week program. It also includes a community forum where you can ask questions. You can ask me questions directly. You can connect with other people who are doing the program. It also comes with a resource library that we're always updating, filled with tons of educational articles, videos, how-tos to help you on your strength journey. If you want access to this program, you can find it in the link in my bio on Instagram. I'm also going to leave a link in the show notes. This program is for you if you're somebody who wants to learn how to squat, bench press, overhead press, deadlift, and row safely and efficiently. You don't have to do the barbell versions. There's dumbbell versions. There's machine versions that you can pick from on the program. But if you want to learn the barbell versions, that is definitely something we teach you in the program. If you want to build strength and resiliency to support your climbing, this program is for you. This program is for you if you want an effective, time-efficient, sustainable program to follow. You can repeat this program and still get something out of it. I've had people repeat it up to 4 times. If you can commit to 2 sessions a week of strength training along with your normal climbing sessions, this program is for you. There's 2 and 3 day options available, and we also talk about how to structure the strength training in with your climbing sessions, which is a podcast episode we're going to do, but that's already a resource that we have in this program. You'll walk away from this program feeling significantly stronger, feeling more resilient, and being less injury prone. You'll walk away from this program feeling confident in the weight area. You're going to have a deep understanding of the strength movements and how to do them well and how to do them safely and efficiently. You'll also walk away from this program understanding how to auto-regulate your training, which is so important. It's so important. We're going to have a whole separate episode about that on the podcast. So if you're interested in getting help with a program that is available for you, I saw a piece of content from a colleague just yesterday, actually, that said something like, people typically make better gains on a program, and it's not always because of the program itself, although I really love the programming in my foundational strength training program. But what that means is you can actually turn your brain off and use more mental energy on just executing the program versus overthinking every single component of your training. It's literally why I hire my coach to write my programming. Yes, I can write my own powerlifting program, but do I want to spend all that mental energy, or do I want to sit there and overthink my own program every single time I design a block? Absolutely not. So I have someone else do it for me. If you want me to do that for you, that's what this program is for. It's not even necessarily about the program itself. Like I said, yes, it's a great program. I love the programming in the foundational strength training program, but I often feel like people sometimes assume that they're making huge progress because they followed a specific program or they used a certain exercise or a certain protocol. But actually, a lot of times people make progress because they finally stopped second guessing whether their program was perfect, and they actually stuck with a plan long enough to get some results. Even a mediocre plan executed consistently will be better than program hopping or on and off training. So if you want some help with that, that's exactly what my foundational strength training program is for. If you guys have any questions about the program, feel free to email me or DM me on Instagram. But that's it. This is the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you loved the episode and you enjoy this podcast, please be sure to rate the podcast and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us get more eyes on the podcast. Tell your friends about it. Screenshot this podcast and share it on your Instagram. Share it on your Instagram stories and tag me at Natasha Barnes. And also make sure you follow me on Instagram at Natasha Barnes if you're not already, and subscribe to the podcast so that you can get notifications when we drop a new episode. The podcast is available on Spotify. It's available on Apple Podcasts. It's available on Amazon Music. It's pretty much available anywhere you can get a podcast at this point. If you need help with a climbing injury or training, check out my website, natashabarnesrehab.com. And that's it. All right, y'all. I will catch you in the next episode, and thank you for listening.